The duties and powers of the President of the United States. So in this particular one, what we're going to look at are what are what are all the jobs that the president has to do essentially in governing our nation. Well, first of all, in Article 2, we see that it says the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Now, how does he do that? He does these through these different jobs, and you can see, I don't need to read through them all. Some of them are a little bit more important than others, but they're all jobs that he or she potentially partake in. First of all, let's look at chief executive. And the way I kind of like to think about it is, I have a couple of images there, but one is like the binoculars. Essentially, the job of the chief executive is to look off into the future or look off into the distance and see how does that president want to take, or what direction does he want to take uh, the country into. So you can see that the chief executive is invested with the executive power of the Constitution, right? He's the leader of the United States. He runs the country, sets the agenda. Essentially, what he is he's like a CEO of a company. Like when we see, or before Steve Jobs died, he was CEO of Apple. He was the one, he didn't make all the new products, but he set the agenda for Apple to be able to make those products. Something to think about. Now, what are some of the powers that the chief executive has? And there's a couple of really important ones. And one, he's able to appoint officials to their position within the government, generally within the executive branch. He also has the ability to appoint federal judges. So that is actually at the district level as well at the Supreme Court level. And he can grant reprieves and pardons. Like a pardon is when usually these happen near the end of a term, but somebody who might be loyal to the president or somebody who was sentenced, the president believes wrongly, he can grant a pardon and get them out of jail. Another role is the chief legislator. Now, this is the one that's most confusing to the students, and the reason behind that is because they think, well, doesn't the legislative branch have the job of making the laws? And that is 100% correct. However, what the president does is he's kind of like the cheerleader on the sideline. He's like the main architect of where he wants the country to go. Think about when Barack Obama first ran for president in 2008. One of his main goals was to create a healthcare system whereby everybody could get health insurance. Now, he can't make that law. What he has to do, though, is he has to initiate it or start the idea. He has to insist that members of Congress, or demand that members of Congress, work on this legislation. And he got some key allies to help him. So he can't do it. He has to get Congress to do it. And then what Congress does, they make it, then he signs it. Does he get exactly what he wants? Generally, no. But at least that's a good start. As commander in chief, we have a couple of key points here. And one is the fact that our president is civilian leader of the armed forces. We have had former generals be presidents, but what they have to do is they have to resign their commission. So they can't be a general. We couldn't have like General Ulysses S. Grant run for president as a general. He had to resign his commission, and then he can run as a civilian. We don't necessarily allow generals to be politicians, although they are civilian politicians, maybe. So it's very important that we have a civilian, somebody who's not in the military, in charge of our military. He's the commander in chief of 1.4 million men and women in arms. He's commander in chief of the entire arsenal subject to the president, or the entire arsenal subject to the president's control. And what that means is it's the president that ultimately makes the decision whether or not we attack a country, or whether we drop a nuclear bomb, or fire a missile with a nuclear bomb on it. So that ultimately becomes his decision, just like it was Harry Truman's decision in 1945 to drop it on Japan. As chief of state, this is where the president is kind of the ceremonial head of government. Um, and so, as the symbol of the nation, essentially, as chief of state, whenever a president or whenever the United States like hosts a leader from another country, and literally every day the president hosts somebody at the White House, whether it's president of Ghana or the prime minister of Japan or the Queen of England, he greets them as chief of state, essentially the leader of our nation. Uh, as chief of state, he doesn't really have any powers. It's just he's the symbol. Now, the reason I have this image up there is usually when people in other countries are upset with our country, they tend to burn like an effigy or like a symbol of the United States. So you might see like them burning the American flag or burning like like a doll they made of Uncle Sam, or you'll see them doing negative things to the images of the president. And so the whole idea is they're upset with the United States. As chief diplomat, the president is the main architect of Americans' foreign policy. So just this past year, uh, we've tried to create better relationship with Iran, which we've had a very poor relationship since 1979. Um, we've tried to create a new relationship with Cuba. So that is all at the president's discretion. The president has insisted that we begin to make inroads into places that we haven't previously been there. He's also the nation's chief spokesman. So whenever anything bad happens, like right now, there's poor economic uh, news coming out of like Europe and Greece, and they asked the president for his opinion on it because he is our nation's. Well, what does the United States think about this? Well, that is that's his role as chief administrator. And so think about this, an administrator, they tend to run the day-to-day running of like something. So like who's the chief administrator at Lawrence Central or Lawrence North? And that would be the principal, right? The CEO might be like the superintendent of Lawrence Township, but the chief administrator is would be the principal, right? Essentially, the chief administrator is the director of the federal government. They run the governmental machine, just like uh, Mr. Krauser or Mr. Valadez runs the two high schools. The president runs the country. However, those two principals don't employ 2.7 million workers. They don't spend $3.8 trillion a year. So a little bit different. But chief administrator, day to day. Chief executive has the far range vision. As chief of party, they're essentially the acknowledged leader of the party. And really what that means is that if we were to think who is the leader of the Democrats, it happens to be President Barack Obama. When you're not holding the presidency as a party, you tend to not have a party leadership. So when we think about the Republicans, you could probably name 20 different people that you think have some legitimate claim to party leadership. So as chief of party, it's his job to, for example, there's something called the coattail effect. The coattail effect is the idea that when somebody's popular, other candidates like try to jump on that person's coattails. A coattail, if you remember, like the old, like think of Abraham Lincoln or something like that, where he wore those long, that big coat or the big formal jacket that had the long tails coming off, kind of like a prom. And those are coattails. So people would jump on his coattails, and we're talking figuratively, not literally. Figuratively jump on the coattails and want to be associated with that. In 2008, all the Democrats wanted to be associated with Barack Obama. That's jumping on coattails. And lastly, then we have what's called chief citizen. When we think of, you know, the American dream, what a true American family looks like, you tend to look at like at the president's family. Uh, they tend to represent all of the American people. They provide moral leadership. Moral leadership. You know, we can see just from this role, we tend to see. You know, think of Barack Obama as kind of a regular person. You know, when he's relaxing, what does he like to do? Or when he works out, he likes to play hoops. There's tons of pictures of him like shooting hoops, and he's left-handed, so he's always got that kind of weak left-handed jumper. But as chief citizen as well, or married to the chief citizen, Michelle Obama has really been able to be impactful in the nation, and most notably in your school lunches. She's really pushed for a more healthier lunch. And as the leader of our nation, you know, we kind of follow along. So anyway, so those are the roles. Let me go ahead and go back a little bit so that we can see all of them. So if you remember, chief of state is like the symbol of the nation. Chief administrator is the day-to-day running of the country. Commander in chief is leader of the military. Chief legislator helps to kind of push legislation, but cannot write it or cannot pass it or make it a law. As chief executive, he creates the long view, the path where we're going as a nation. As chief diplomat, his job is to develop good relationships with foreign nations. Uh, as chief of party, he's the leader of the party, and as chief citizen, he's the leader of our country kind of morally. All right. Hopefully that helps.